I need to see people's faces when I'm talking, so I know when to shut up. Talking about the wives, seriously, the wives are veterans also. And if you're out there, and if you are married to or have been married to a sweetheart or a family member of a veteran, I want you to feel just as proud of the veterans as we do of ourselves. And I want you to give yourselves a big round of applause, please. I also want to acknowledge a guest of mine that I asked them to come and see how we do things in New York and see how the members of the Guard and the Veterans Association, how we do for our veterans on Veterans Day. And I asked the Sergeant Major of the 42nd Division Support Command advisor, Sergeant Major Thomas's wife, to join us, and he's here. Would you please stand, Sergeant Thomas? Sergeant Major Thomas. I'm not going to talk too much more about the military, because I don't want to get anybody else's talk, but I want to let you know that we, the black, and I use the word black, soldiers have always been in the forefront of this nation's fight for liberty and independence throughout the world. And a lot of us have attained a lot of rank. I know you saw the movie Buffalo Soldier. You know about the 369 because you see the men of bronze. But you got to understand that until the school situation at Little Rock, no one really knew that how many black senior non-commissioned officers we have. We have a lot. And now we have a lot of black generals, admirals, and generals in the Air Force. And I think we've come a long way. Yes, I'm proud to be in the military. I've been in the military as long as I can remember. I will be here as long as I can remember, as long as I live. Even though they kicked me out in about 6-7 years, I will still be part of the military. 715 Veterans Association is my home. I've always been a member. I want to take an opportunity to introduce the members of the Executive Board and the Officers Association. Now, you're going to see there's a little redundancy here because a lot of the members of the committees are also board members. The chairpersons of the committees are not board persons. I do have a vice president who oversees the committees. In this case, he's been mentioned, Brother Bob Shands, Sergeant Shands, is that vice president. The board members of the association are, I wish you just stand in place, please. Courage Smith Jr. And I want to announce that today is his birthday. Happy birthday to Courage Smith. Mitchell Walters, Ronald Dash, Wilmot Ward, John S. Cox, Colonel Cox. The Sergeant of Arms is Robert Richardson. The Chaplain of the Association is Simon Stallings. Simon Stallings. Corresponding Secretary, Frank Williams. Financial Secretary, Philip Campbell. The Treasurer, Malcolm Joseph. The father of the distinguished and honorable Deputy Borough President of the Bronx. The Recording Secretary is Esther Douglas. The second vice president, and we name them first, second, and third, even though they have equal responsibilities in the association. The second vice president is Joe Murphy. The first vice president, Linda Joseph. The vice president is Robert Shands. And I've had the pleasure for the last, I don't know how many years, of being the president of the association and the chairman of the board. Thank you very much, and enjoy your meal. Have a good time.
Is Mr. Ritchie in the house? Come on up here, fella. We want everybody to see you since we had to beat you up for many years. I've been beating this fella for the last 20 years.
You're beating up on me.
Right? And he's been a helping hand. Wherever he could, he would stick in there and help us. He's been helping us over the years. He's one of the reasons that we can give this meal out to you as cheap as we do. Because we keep him down, that way we don't have to charge you for the meal. Okay? So we just want to take this opportunity and give him a little thanks for what he has tried to do for us. We got him a little plaque, and it reads, presented to Richie in appreciation for the concern and consideration shown to us in the past years from the officers and members of the 715th Veterans Association.
Well, Brother Bob and all the members, I always loved working with you, even though you chew me down to almost nothing. The owner has a fit. But I don't consider it a business relationship in all the years I've dealt with them. We come down on a Saturday night to do the arrangements. We, like Brother John Smith said, he wasn't invited to the parties the Saturday night. We have a few drinks and we do enjoy it, and I don't consider it a working, I consider it a friendship, really. Glad to see you every year. I started this as an idea with Bob and George. We sat in an office and we said, they do it at the Armory, and I said, gee, why don't we use a little room here? And I think we started, Bob, with 100 people? Maybe 100 people the first Sunday, 150, and this is what it grew to. And I really do looking forward every year to it, and I do love seeing Reverend Mickens here. We don't get to church much in this business, but we do once a year in November. Again, I'd like to thank each and every one of you. Thank you.
And just before we get down to the man of the hour, have a little notice here Brother Campbell wants me to remind you of, and that's our Memorial Parade, which will be held Tuesday morning. Okay, we'll formate at 39th Street and 5th Avenue at 0900 hours. We will step off at 1000 hours sharp. We will go down 5th Avenue to the Internal Light Monument at 24th Street and 5th Avenue, and we will place a wreath there at the monument. We're asking that all members and friends come out and join us in the parade. Now we will bring the President back again to introduce the Speaker of the Hour.
Thank you, Bob. I've been given the pleasurable duty of introducing the speaker, and I'm going to give you a little bit out of his bio. Cornelius Blackshear, also known as Neil Blackshear, is an example for all of us. It really is. In 1957, he came to New York from his home in Florida as an unskilled laborer. He put himself through college and law school while he worked as a patrolman, and later became a detective sergeant in the New York City Police Department, where he served with distinction. During his period of time on the police force, some of his contributions towards the improvement of law enforcement were the development and instruction of course designed to assist minority police officers in passing promotion examination. He was a representative to and aid in the increase in the number of minorities entering the New York City Police Department. And he assisted in the design and development of an anti-crime experiment, which was to determine the minimum manning levels of non-uniformed personnel to reduce the violent street crimes. In 1979, he was appointed Assistant United States Trustee in Bankruptcy for the Southern District of New York. His responsibilities were the supervision of some of the largest cases before the bankruptcy court. He supervised the exceptionally complex Johns-Manville Chapter 11 reorganization proceedings. In 1985, he was sworn in as the United States Bankruptcy Judge for the Southern District of New York. Some of his awards that he has received over the years are the Special Achievement Award by the Department of Justice in 1980, Ruth Whitehead Whaley Award by the Black American Law Students Association of Fordham University, and the Executive Office of the United States Trustees Award in 1985. Not to be limited to the dictates of his employment, Judge Blackshear has also lectured at various criminal justice courses, colleges, law schools, and bankruptcy seminars. His other activities include membership in the Fordham Advisory Committee on Minority Affairs, as well as a writer for the Board of Contributors of the Bankruptcy Strategists. I give you, for your pleasure, the Honorable Cornelius Blackshear, Judge of the Bankruptcy Court.
Officers and members of the 715th Veterans Association, officers and members of the 715th Veterans Association Auxiliary, honored guests. The theme of the subject that I wish to talk about tonight is the contribution of Black Americans in defense of America. The history books, as well as the media, as well as movies, TVs, would have you believe that those contributions were of little significance. However, a view or a review of the Black contribution will show that they were not only numerous, but they were very valuable in this country's quest to not only gain its freedom, but its quest to defend its freedom from foreign invasion. A lot of you are probably more familiar with the history of the Black contribution to the defense of America than I am. However, in an attempt to be brief, I decided to just basically touch upon those areas where we had significant Black contribution, and also attempt to relate it to contemporary events that were occurring in America at the time that these contributions were being made, and touch upon some of the ironies, the inconsistencies, and the contradiction in logic of the philosophy of this country over the years. If you're interested in seeing or reading a more in-depth analysis, I recommend for your reading 3 of the books that I use as far as the research in order to prepare this speech. The first is the Negro Almanac, which was compiled and edited by Harry A. Plasky and Roscoe C. Brown, and that's put out by the Bellwether Publishing Company. Another book is Black Americans in Defense of Our Nation, and that is a publication that's put out by the Department of Defense, and you can find that in any journal printing offices or under the Superintendent of Documents. And finally, the last publication that I consulted was Black Defenders of America, 1775 to 1973, and that was authored by Robert Ewell Green, and that is put out by the Johnson Publication. In starting any research or preparation for a speech, there must be a starting point. And I chose a starting point not with an individual who was considered a member of the military, but an individual that was considered to be the first Black patriot of this country, and that individual who died in defense of this country. That individual was Crispus Attucks, and that was in March of 1770, when the friction between this country and England was of such that we had sporadic uprisings, and Crispus Attucks was one of the first Americans killed in one of these sporadic outbreaks. That was called the Boston Massacre. After that, America began to arm itself, it began to grumble, it began to shake under the iron will of the English overlords. And back as early as April 1975, you found that you had blacks that were Minutemen, and they were present in places such as Lexington and Concord. Then an interesting thing began to develop. Washington began to assemble his troops. And in assembling his troops, he decided that he really didn't want blacks in the military. And that was in around July of 1775. However, what was happening also at that time, that was the British governor of Virginia, Lord Dunmore, who offered freedom to all black slaves who would join his so-called Ethiopian regiment. Their inscription on their uniform was "Liberty to Slaves." He gathered some 300 in this particular regiment, and that made Washington have second thoughts. And George Washington decided that he would also the Continental Congress at that time indicated that no black Americans were to be a member of the American Revolutionary Army. But in response to Lord Dunmore, Washington and the Continental Congress decided that free Negroes could be members of this American Revolutionary Army. Even that had its drawbacks, because there were certain white Americans at that time who, while was patriotic, did not want to go to war, so they sent their slaves in their place. Now, one of the ironies of this time period is that this is 1775. America's about to go to war with England, and they're going to war because they want their freedom. And while they were in the first instance, denying the black soldier his place in history, they were producing a document called the Declaration of Independence, which came out around 1776. However, blacks did contribute heavily towards the war effort during the American Revolution. One such contributor was a Peter Salem. And Peter Salem in 1775 distinguished himself at the Battle of Bunker Hill. He served in the Army for over 7 years, and he served bravely. And in fact, in 1882, a monument was erected in his honor in the Boston Commons. In 1909, in fact, the Daughters of the American Revolution honored him by acquiring his house and beautifying it. Now here's another somewhat of an irony, because that same organization, 30 years later in 1939, refused Marian Anderson the right to sing at Constitutional Hall, therefore forcing her to sing at another spot, and that spot was the Lincoln Memorial. At the end of the war, around 1783, you had some 5,000 blacks who were serving in the American Revolutionary Army. In 1783, those black regiments, because at this time, even though in some of the regiments there were integrations, that for the most part, most of those units were segregated. So in 1783, all of those black regiments were being deactivated. In 1792, Congress passed an act which restricted the military services to, quote, free, able-bodied whites. So here we are, that when the going got tough, blacks, as was stated by some of the speakers before me, volunteered to fight for this country. And as soon as they had helped in the defeat of America's enemies, that they were then disbanded and not given the gratitude that other soldiers were given. Then something else happened, which was in this line of events that gradually started growing until we get to Vietnam, but I'm a little ahead of myself. In 1803, that was during the Louisiana Purchase, and they had there, for protection of that area, units of black soldiers who were to protect that unit, to protect that area rather. Now, once America bought Louisiana, though that unit volunteered, again, to continue the service that they had been providing for Spain as well as for France. And America was again in a dilemma. At first, they just ignored them. But during that period of time, they required something like a police force to stay there. So they partially recognized them. Then there was a bit of an uproar, so they disbanded them. We then come to the War of 1812. Now, in 1812, again, this country was threatened, mainly by England. And again, the blacks answered the call. And the same battalion that was disbanded in 1803 was used as the nucleus to form the Free Men of Color so that they could assist in the battle of 1812. In December of 1814, that was after Andrew Jackson had decisively defeated the British at the Battle of New Orleans, General Jackson praised the bravery and military contribution of the black troops who had participated in that battle. However, that wasn't long-lasting, because after the war, the blacks were not allowed to march in the parades honoring that battle. And on February 1820, the United States Army issued an order that stated, in part, no Negro or mulatto will be received as a recruit of the Army. So we're back to where we were right after the Civil War, right after the Revolutionary War and right after the Louisiana Purchase. Now, you have to put in proper perspective what the War of 1812 really did for this country. And what it did was that it was considered the capstone of American independence. And that was because of the fact that it finally sort of settled that war that had been going on since 1776 between England and the United States. And it sort of really gave America its independence as opposed to the Revolutionary War. However, we face another irony, because even though America received this independence, is that it was gained with the Treaty of Ghent, which ended the war, but it provided for the mutual restoration of properties. And during that time, black folks were considered property because they were slaves. So what that meant is that on both sides, slaves who had fought, hoping to gain their freedom, returned to their owners. And in fact, at about that time, and right after, actually around 1857, and been building up to it, the Supreme Court, in one of its landmark decisions, decided that blacks could not be considered as citizens under the Constitution, because the Constitution guaranteed citizens certain rights, and those rights were being violated if they were citizens. Then we come to the time period of 1861 through 1865, and that brings us to the Civil War. Now again, history will tell you that the Civil War was fought over slavery. That's not really the case. That was not the primary concern during the Civil War. The primary concern in the Civil War was the fact that they wanted to keep the Union from being divided. And in fact, Lincoln was quoted to have said that if he could maintain the Union and maintain slavery, that's what he would do. Again, American blacks coming to the aid of its country, at this time being represented by the Union, wanted to enlist and fight, and hoping again to maintain or gain their freedom. Lincoln had a problem because the border states, which could go either way, would probably get upset if they armed blacks. So in the first instance, he felt that it would be a quick, decisive war, and they would get the Confederacy back in line. However, they had a major defeat at the Little Big Run. They had a major defeat, which caused Lincoln to rethink his position, and he then decided that they would use blacks in the army. At first, in a situation where they would be support troops, the same as the Confederacy was using black slaves to support their armies, thereby freeing up whites to do the actual battle. That is what Lincoln decided to do, but unfortunately he had to then turn to the blacks in the army to continue to fight whatever battles they were fighting as far as the Confederacy was concerned. Now during this period of time, and this was like in 1861, it's interesting to note that the Navy, unlike the Army, was actually recruiting blacks because they were finding it difficult to man all of the ships. So therefore, and this is an important note, is that during the 17 and 1800s, that blacks were allowed to actually be members of the navies of America. However, in 1863, Lincoln made his Emancipation Proclamation. We then get the development of the Ku Klux Klan, and in 1865, Congress ratifies the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery. It's also interesting to note that during the Civil War, there were 17 black soldiers who received the Medal of Honor. Right after the war, during 1867 to 1877, that was during the period of Reconstruction, and you had armed black soldiers who were in the South. That caused a lot of friction in that particular area, so those soldiers were moved to western points and posts, and they became known as the Buffalo Soldiers. But during that period of time that they were out west and fighting in the American Indian Wars, that there were 23 some odd black soldiers who received the Medal of Honor. Now, during this period also, around 1875, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act, which in 1883, the Supreme Court found it to be unconstitutional. 1896, in a case called Plessy v. Ferguson, is where we first get the doctrine of separate and equal, which puts the stamp of approval of this country on segregation. However, in 1898, which was a short war, that was the Spanish-American War, you had 6 black soldiers who won Medal of Honors. No black soldier was to win another Medal of Honor until the Korean War. That means in World War I and World War II, there were no black recipients of the Medal of Honor. In Vietnam, they had 20 recipients. Now, World War I came along around 1914 to 1918. At this point, blacks having served in the military began to sort of shape under being treated the same way they were treated before they had gone off to war. And during World War I, you also saw the largest number of black commissioned officers in the service. And also during World War I, we have our first black pilot, although he flew for France as opposed to America. And in fact, becoming a pilot in the French Army is that he won a $1,000 bet from one of his white soldiers who was stationed with him, because he never felt that this individual had the mettle in order to be a pilot. This individual was Eugene Bullard, and he was known as the Black Swallow of Death. And the emblem on his plane at that time was that all blood runs red. Now, right after World War I, blacks really began to look towards the fact that if they were going to make the world safe for democracy, that they should be a part of that democracy. And as a result, you had blacks who came back from World War I that were actually lynched in their uniforms because they refused to take off their uniforms. However, things began to change at this time. And they began to change to such an extent that up to around 1940, we had Benjamin Davis, who became the first black general. In 1941, there was a March on Washington. And in that March on Washington resulted in Executive Order number 8802, which prohibited the discrimination in defense industries. Even in society in general, things were beginning to slowly change. Then in 1941, 1945, World War II broke out, and hundreds of thousands of blacks flocked to the service of their country again. However, it was still basically a segregated army. However, emerging from this time was a sort of a extension of the black swallow, because we then get the Tuskegee experiment, where we had black pilots, combat pilots, who were put into the air to fight during World War II. In 1948, after the war, we had Executive Order 9981, where President Truman said equality of treatment and opportunity must be maintained in all the armed services. Again, things were changing, but very slowly. Finally, in 1956 to 53, we had the Korean conflict. Again, we had partial integration of the service, not full opportunity, but a movement. And at the same time, around 1954, we get a refutation of the Plessy v. Brown case, or Plessy v. Ferguson case, rather, in that we get Brown versus Board of Education, where the Supreme Court said that separate education was not equal. Now, finally, we get to the final irony, because we get to the Vietnam War. And during the time of the Vietnam War, we find that black soldiers were finally being given equal treatment to a certain extent, a lot more so than in other situations. However, it was an unpopular war. So therefore, the black soldiers, even though they began to get this equal treatment in armed services, is that it did not give them the full benefit as other soldiers in prior wars. Now we ask ourselves a question, coming through this litany of historical events, why do blacks suffer, or why did they suffer these indignities for the privilege of risking their lives for this country? Everything that you consider, or that you study, you must realize you cannot do it in a vacuum. I think that the answer can be found in a story of an individual who was relating to me the fact that he had a friend who had cancer, and he was going for all of the treatments, and he was suffering the side effects of those treatments. He was losing his hair, he was in pain, he was losing weight, and someone wanted to know from him, why are you putting yourself through all of this misery? And his answer was, it's easy when you consider the alternative. And in this situation, I think that when you consider the alternatives, the black American soldiers really had no other route to go. We owe them a debt of gratitude, because I think that if you went with me through these various phases of the black American soldier, you will find that there's a direct correlation between blacks obtaining their civil rights in the bigger community, and it's tied directly to the black soldier's struggle to serve his country and to reap the benefits of service to that country. And that still doesn't answer the question as to why, during that period of time, being constantly rebuffed, that he continued to do it. I don't think that the black soldier was doing it for the America that he was in at that time. I think he was doing it for the America that he felt could be. He was doing it, and he was doing it because this country, unlike any other country, has a social contract with its citizens. And that contract basically is taken from written documents. And just taking an excerpt from one of those documents, I want to read to you just this passage. And that passage states, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." The American soldier in his quest to defend his country was doing it based on his dream, and his dream even before Martin Luther King proclaimed his dream. He was defending this country, hoping to make his dream a reality. So, as I indicated before, I think that all of Black America owes a debt of gratitude to those blacks who defended this country with valor and honor from 1775 up through and including the Vietnam War. And hopefully their efforts will be and should be considered one of the major contributing factors when this country finally decides that it must fulfill its social contract with all of its citizens. Thank you.
I want to thank the Honorable Blackshear for that bit of education. You know, that's one thing that happened to the blacks throughout the world. We didn't know our own history, and many of us out there still don't know a lot of the things that people have done in this great country of ours. You know, the black race have came further in the 200 years that they was in bondage here than any other race setting foot on this land. And thank you again for enlightening for it. We really appreciate it. We hope that you continue to come out and enjoy our services with us. And we enjoy the knowledge. Thank you very much. For those who have the journal, we wish that you would read the back of it. We have our itinerary for the coming up year, some of the things that we'll be doing. And we hope that next year that everybody will get the names in early, so that this poor committee wanted to work so hard up to the last minute. We're trying to clear up everything by the early part of October, so that we would have a month to really sit down and go over and see if there's anything that we left there. Okay, the president forgot something, so I'm gonna let him come back and say what he got to say, and after that, you can roam around and greet people. Oh, I'm sorry, before you come up, I forgot. Ooh, most important thing. Yeah, but stay right here, it's only gonna take a second. I wish you to give, everyone to give a round of applause to the beautiful singing of the apostles.
One quick thing, I wouldn't be able to go back and have a general membership meeting with the association if I don't acknowledge the fact that we have many of the members of the association present with us today. Now we understand that they all can't be here, but I'd like to have all the members of the 715 Veterans Association, and we're going to let even the ones that haven't paid their dues yet. And I want to make sure that I don't forget the members of the Veterans of the Foreign Wars and the members of the American Legion, those black soldiers and veterans who contributed so much to our country. And just one thing on Judge Blackshear's speech, I remember what happened, I know about what happened with the Princess Attucks, and it has plagued us through our lives. When they came back and they wanted to know who fired the first shot, someone said, the color guy did it.